And we are live. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Good job. You did an entire week of helping to protect the food supply, getting out there and making sure that everything is safe and wholesome so that everyone can enjoy their Christmas. And we really appreciate it. And so I am Bryan Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group, and I'm with Austin Welch, the co-founder of Sage Media. Austin, how are you doing today?
Doing great, man.
Awesome. Yeah. So I know Austin appreciates all you do as well. We are really, really happy for what you do. And if you are a regular on the chat, first off, let us know where you're at in the world. I am in Loveland, Colorado. And Austin, where are you at today?
I am in Denver, Colorado.
Nice. Yeah. And so a little bit of snow coming, maybe. I watched the forecast this morning. They altered it greatly. So hopefully, fingers crossed, it doesn't happen until later this evening. So, but snow's not a bad thing here. We, as you know, people love to say, we need the moisture. But, you're not going to be here for long, so you're going on an amazing trip to talk. Why don't you let everybody know about what's going on with that?
Yeah. So I'm going out to the Dubai Food Safety Conference. It's going to do a session on how to create a speak up culture. And then we're running a workshop, which is our food safety culture design workshop. So it covers a little bit around creative problem solving. So how to identify unique issues to address, and then how to go about getting started on creating an action plan to start addressing some of the top issues that are identified during the workshop.
Nice. Yeah. And number one, so for whatever reason, this Dubai Food Safety Conference is really starting to take off. This thing over the past few years is really starting to get some really good attendance. And if you're new to the chat and you're not familiar with Austin and his work he does at Sage Media, cutting edge training technology is really some amazing stuff. As Duncan and Tim, who are joining us this morning, know. So good morning, gentlemen. Good to see you as usual. If you're new to the chat, one of the things you're going to notice is we live stream at this time every Friday. So 8 a.m. Mountain Time, where Austin and I are, 10 a.m. Eastern. And we talk about a food safety subject. And you'll notice here with this, that this is not a lecture or a presentation. This is a discussion. And we absolutely love the feedback with the audience. And we've really built up a core group of people who are here pretty much every week. And that's an amazing dedication. An hour out of your busy schedule every week to join us and go through this information. Man, we really appreciate it. And we appreciate all you're doing to help spread food safety. So thank you very much for that. So one of the things that we love to do here on the chat is a ceremonial drink, everybody. So grab your favorite beverage with us and join us. Cheers.
Cheers.
Very nice. Yeah. So went and visited some friends, and they're hooked into the coffee scene. So he gave me a bag of his coffee that he buys through his network, and I'm just like, ooh, I can't wait to try it. Right?
Nice.
So very excited about that. So this is a time of year, really, Austin, where people should be planning. And you're looking at 2024. If you're on a January to December fiscal calendar, which most people are, you are starting to look at this and saying, okay, I need to really start planning out some key activities for next year. I need to create my budget. I need to look at my personnel. I need to look at my key performance indicators. And I think one of the most important ones is training, right? What am I going to be doing next year for training my team?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, we're seeing people popping up right now, kind of last minute, where it's like, hey, we've got some budget we need to burn so that we can get the proper budget for next year. So it always does kind of come down to the last minute.
and that's always the hard part, right? It should be, right? It's kind of one of those shoulds. It should be that, you have plenty of time and you sit at your desk and you scope everything out and you figure out your training plan through the entire year. But stuff happens and you get backed up and there's crises, and it ends up being at the end of the year and you're trying to jam all this stuff in. Because to your point, in a lot of companies, if you have a training budget and you don't spend it, then next year the accounting department goes, why are we putting this line item in here again? That's, and then you know how that conversation goes. So it kind of puts you in a real defensive mode. Stephanie from the Winter Wonderland in Germany. So nice to see you.
Nice. Oh, hey, Stephanie. I'm actually going to be stopping off in Germany on the way back home from Dubai. We're going to go down to Heidelberg for a day or two and check that out. Go to the Black Forest.
The jealousy continues. So Duncan here, yeah, this is a good context, good thing around this too, right? Is like PM, right? So when you're looking at training, it's not at all like PM in that you have to do it. It's interesting, and then that's a good point, Duncan, because as you kind of think about these two things, PM, if you put off changing the bearings in a motor, or you don't change the grease fittings or things like this, it's going to catch up to you pretty quick. Training can be more of a long-term train wreck, right? So if you have new employees who are coming in the plant and you get off on the bad foot and you don't go through a good training program, those mistakes are going to haunt you forever. And so that kind of gets into the theme of what we wanted to talk about here today. And this kind of goes back to an awesome movie that I loved from the late 90s, early 2000s, maybe, Seven, right? Which was about a serial killer and the 7 deadly sins. And it was Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt were the stars. Mm-hmm. Oh, and Kevin Spacey was the bad guy. If you haven't seen Seven, it is a fantastic movie, and it holds up really well. It's an excellent movie. And as we were preparing here for the chat here today, we're like, well, let's talk about, with everything focusing on end of year and training and these type of things, what are the 7 deadly sins of training, right? What are those things out there that are waiting to, right? Get you Jason style, right? When you're not expecting it out of the closet out there. So, what are some of those biggest sins? Let's kind of dive in here because we got so much to talk about here. What's the first deadly sin of training?
All right. So I would say the first deadly sin of training is using training as punishment.
Oh, that's horrible.
So we see this a lot, and maybe punishment is a bit of an extreme term, but utilizing training as, if something does not happen according to plan, then people are automatically back to training. And there's one of the big issues with viewing training in this way is that it starts to create this negative stigma around training, right? That training is a punishment, and that if I don't do thing, if I mess up, then that's going to be something that I have to go back through. And we really, one of the big things that I've talked about in previous chats and I talk about in these, workshops is motivation and the different types of motivation. And so whenever we send people back into training as a punishment, we're leveraging what's called extrinsic motivation, right? So that's motivation that comes from outside of the person. So it's basically, I'm being motivated to either achieve a reward or to avoid a punishment. Mm-hmm. And that, sorry, I just saw Duncan's comment.
Duncan.
That's great, man. I'm keeping that one. A masochistic need for knowledge. But yeah. So we really want to leverage like the right kind of motivation, which is this intrinsic motivation, this desire to learn. Because inherently people have a desire to learn. It's a core element that makes us human. We have curiosity. We want to enhance our ability within our jobs and the function and our place in the world. So we want to find ways to not leverage training as a punishment, but to create this learning environment or this learning culture. And this is a lot of what I work on as Duncan, dude, you're out of control. It's so distracting.
You're killing my guest, Duncan. What are you doing? I'm going to punish you with some training if you're not careful. Yeah.
I know. But yeah, we want to create this learning culture, right? So as opposed to learning being this punishment, that this is this opportunity for us to grow and to improve ourselves within our job. So yeah, I would say that is the deadly sin number one, is using training as punishment.
Yeah, and part of this too, as you think about it, is, I mean, part of this, I mean, the psychology of this is huge. So why do companies pay millions of dollars for celebrity spokespeople? It's because they want to link their brand to the good feeling that that celebrity gives to their fans. So when you see Michael Jackson drinking a Pepsi or things like this, you're like, oh, wow, that's really cool. Or, you know, Beyonce's got a fancy bag or things like this. It works the other way too. So if you are the heavy in the plant and you're doing you do what I say, I'm going to make you right. Now training is linked to negative behavior, as you said. And I, as the quality manager, I'm also linked to that as well, right? And people aren't going to like me, which also means that people aren't going to do what I want. It's going to be harder to persuade people. And the spiral is going to continue, right? It's just going to get worse and worse and worse and worse till you get to the point where you can't even do your job. And either someone is going to ask you to move on to another role or company, or you're going to decide to do it on your own. And if you don't learn your lesson, you're just going to repeat that death spiral somewhere else.
Right. And actually, Duncan's next comment here really kind of tees up perfectly the second deadly sin. So Duncan says, it's exactly the way it comes across in customer complaint responses. Sometimes all the operators have been given retraining. Mm-hmm. And this brings up the second deadly sin, which is creating unnecessary training. Yeah. And so what I see a lot is that training can be this knee-jerk reaction, right? So it's there's some type of issue, and then what is viewed as kind of the panacea is that, well, we'll just design a new training, and or we'll put people back through the same training that obviously didn't work the first time. So you kind of definition of insanity. So, it can be this knee-jerk reaction. And then what happens is you've created so much training that now you've developed training fatigue, right? Mm-hmm. People just become numb to all training. And so that's, something that we want to avoid. And so there's a really cool chart that I use personally whenever I'm consulting around whether or not we should be developing a training program or not, because even though I make my money designing training, I do not want to design. I don't want to go into a company and design a training that actually is not going to fix the problem, because then that makes me look bad. And I want to make sure that everything I do has solid success. So there's this really cool flow chart that I use. And Bryan, when you get a chance, if you could bring up that Kathy Moore's chart there. So there's a woman named Kathy Moore. She wrote a book called Map It a few years ago. And Kathy Moore's kind of one of the gurus in the learning design world. And if you get a chance, I highly recommend the book, once again, called Map It. And what it does is it starts to break down the analysis of, is training even necessary? Is this something that we need? And so we go through and ask ourselves, will training help? Excuse me. So this is probably a little bit more in depth than we can get into today. And if you can see it, it starts out at the top left, right? What is our goal? Mm-hmm. And then what do people have to do to reach our goal? And then choose one high priority task or behavior. And so that next
can you see
sideways square right there is why aren't people doing this one thing? Is it caused by a problem with environment, knowledge, skills, or motivation? And so those are the elements that we're really looking at to find out, is the training even necessary? Because, take for instance, we come in and there's an issue around sanitation, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's like, well, we need a new training around sanitation because we keep having these issues. And you come in and you start really doing a deep dive into it. And what you find out is that this isn't really a skill or a knowledge-based issue. This is an environmental issue, right? Mm-hmm. That something needs to be changed within the environment to make it so that this doesn't keep happening. Or sometimes there's a skill issue, but people will inadvertently work on knowledge, right? And this is what we see a lot within training programs, is there's this heavy focus on making sure people have information, but not a new skill. And same thing with motivation. So these, and then each one of these trickles down once you ask the question, is it environmental? Is it motivation? Is it skills, or is it knowledge? And then it trickles down to the next step within each element. So to not get super in depth here, but the goal of this, and what I'm hoping to convey, is do the due diligence to find out, is training even necessary? Because sometimes it might not be, and it's especially true in food safety, because a lot of times it can come down to that environmental situation where you're trying to fix it with this element, but you've never really addressed the root cause.
I love it. So a couple of questions for you. I don't quite understand the difference between knowledge and skills.
Sure. So knowledge is the basic awareness of an issue. So I can have the knowledge that hand washing is very important. I can have the knowledge of the science behind it, the microorganisms, and all of that. But if I don't have the skill of how to properly wash my hands for the right amount of time, to get the soap, in between the fingers and around my thumb and everything like that, that's the skill. That's the actual behavior. And so that's why we say knowledge is not enough, because I can have this new information and not be able to execute upon it. So that's where we get into skill development. A lot of training focuses just on the knowledge, but not on developing the actual tangible skill or behavior that's necessary. And those are two very different things.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, okay, that makes a ton more sense now. So let me try an example for you here. So let's say, for example, that to your point, we're having a sanitation issue, and we're seeing micro hits on some of the equipment and things like that. The knee-jerk response and the easiest path is to say, okay, well, we need more training. So to your point, which I totally love, is, okay, well, let's go talk with the sanitation guys and find out why it's not getting cleaned. It could be personnel turnover. Okay, we've got all brand new people. They don't have the knowledge or the skills to do their job properly. So let's teach them about bacteria and how bacteria hide, and biofilms and these type of things, right? Which is, to your point, it's abstract. It's knowledge. It doesn't tell you how to do the particular task. Versus, okay, now that you understand what we're fighting, let's go out to that piece of machine that we're not getting clean, and I'm going to teach you, new guys, how to properly clean this machine, and what to look out for, and where the problem areas are, and how these tricky areas need to be cleaned by hand, and all of these type of things. So that's knowledge and skill. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay, great. So it may be too, and this is a huge part too. Let's say that I go out now to talk with the sanitation guys, and they have the right crew, and they know what they're doing, and they know how to do it correctly. But to your point, the machine's not cleanable, right? We talk about this on here all the time. And the sanitation guys go, well, there's really bad welds in this machine. It's really not designed for food contact. We fight this thing every single day, and we just can't get it clean. Whoa, right? No amount of training in the world is going to fix that problem, right? So you need to understand that. And I think this goes back to what we talk about here on the chat a lot, right? Which is, and I think knowledge and skills demonstrates this perfectly, Austin, in that, okay, it's great that you have all this technical ability as a QA manager, but if you don't have the people skills and the understanding to go ask questions to understand how to properly execute, you're not going to have a very easy time. You need to have both.
Right. And you kind of dove into this, I think it was last week, around cantaloupe, right? Like, it's like, hey, we keep sitting, we're washing the cantaloupe and it keeps going on. We keep having the same issue. Let's retrain people on the proper way to clean cantaloupe. And it's like, well, that's not going to solve your problem. There's another root cause here that we're dealing with on a particular issue with cantaloupe.
Yeah. And to Duncan's point as well, is this drove me nuts. So I would get, let's say I would have a supplier or a co-man or something like this, and I had a complaint. I had customer issues. Let's say I had foreign material in my products, and I got consumer complaints, and I'm not happy. So I send a complaint to the manufacturer, and within 2 days, the response comes back for the corrective action on the complaint was retrained operators.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's completely BS. That is a lazy QA manager who doesn't want to deal with it and says, okay, I'll just put down, we retrained and be done with it. And odds are that retraining meant he went down to the floor and yelled at some people.
Yeah.
Right? I know that's a complete failure on their side. And they're using it, right? So it's unnecessary training and it's punishment, right? You're hitting both of those first 2 points, right? So you're hitting 2 deadly sins for the price of 1 at that. Wow.
And it's ineffective, right? I mean, like, not all training is created equal. That's why we're covering these 7 deadly sins, because you can, any idiot can put together a PowerPoint presentation and say, this is what needs to happen. But training is such a, there's so many nuanced elements to it. And so making sure that when you're designing it, that you're not falling into these pitfalls. Because there's just retraining off of the same old thing that didn't work the first time. Yeah. Why?
Yeah, and that's let's see if I can do this correctly. With my finger. Whoops! I got my book kind of sitting back there. That's one of the things I talk about in my book. Is there's this hidden. I'm rooting this out. There's this hidden belief in anybody who designs systems, and quality people are really guilty of this. Is that if I write something down, it means that people are going to do it, right? I refer to this as Moses coming down the mountaintop, right? So the QA manager writes this fantastic procedure and brings it down for the glory of all to see, bestows it on the masses, and walks away, and everybody reads it and goes, I'm not doing this, right? It's completely detached from reality.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. This line from Abby talking about, I know, you can have all the information around how to drive a stick, but until you're on that hill at a complete standstill and have to get it out of first, you got to learn the nuance of that, letting that clutch out with the same amount of acceleration without stalling the motor out. And there's no guide that will get you through that. It's through muscle memory. It's through repeated practice.
Yep, absolutely. That's a really good point, Abby. Thank you. And it's true in anything. If you want to learn how to play golf or drive the car, anything, right? You have to learn the theory and then you have to go out and do it. Right? So that's a fantastic point. Thank you, Abby. So what's the third deadly sin in our list today?
Well, actually, sorry, before we go to the third one, there was one other element I wanted to touch upon here, which, when we look at creating unnecessary training, a lot of times this happens because we assume that we know what the problem is, and we go out and we create an intervention for it. And so one of the big things that I do is part of my needs analysis, whenever I go in and design a custom training for a company, is to do qualitative interviews with staff. So typically we will start with like a day-long meeting with all of the stakeholders, the VPs, get the top level leadership thoughts on what needs to happen and what we need to work on. And then I take all that information, but then I take another 2 weeks or so to interview everybody from the plant manager to the frontline team to people in procurement to all these different departments, because that's where we start to really get the real dirt, right? Because there's assumptions that leadership has around what needs to happen, and then we start talking to the workers, and that's where we start to find out, well, here's the real issue that we're dealing with and how it can tie into what the stakeholders are wanting to achieve. So going out and talking to the people, right? Press and flesh, kissing babies and shaking hands and getting out there and finding out, what exactly are the issues that they're having, because a lot of times we make these assumptions and we have no idea what the particular problem is. It might be Tim's got a great one. Interview the staff from hourly workers to plant manager, because that's where we get the real dirt. And that's also, when we talk about qualitative interviewing, a lot of times when we're doing qualitative analysis, what we're looking for is themes, right? We're not looking for hard and fast bullet point quantitative data. We're looking for the kind of mushy, ethereal stuff that's floating out there in the culture. And this is where we get a better pulse on the culture of the company by doing these interviews and finding out what is it that people actually need, what do they want, what do they not want, what are their opinions on what's working and what's not working. So going out and actually doing those interviews will give us a lot more robust data to figure out what kind of training is needed to make sure that we don't create unnecessary training.
Yeah, such a huge point. So you have to get the kind of the basics of what the objectives are and what you're looking at from say the plant manager in this example, to Tim's point, and you kind of get the understanding of, oh yes, we execute against blah blah blah. But once you go out to the floor and you start talking to the people, and they're like, well, yeah, I've told them about this problem for 3 months now, and nobody does anything, so I just quit telling them. Right? You're never going to find that out unless you go out on the floor and you talk with people. If you want to understand how the machinery really operates and what people are really thinking, you got to go out and talk with them. I refer to it as fresh eyes, right? You're the new person going in there. You're unbiased. You don't have all of the history, and you're going in there and you're looking around and you're talking with people and you're seeing how things exist in reality and then translating that back. And I'm glad you pulled me back to that point, Austin, because that's super important. Oh, maintenance. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, maintenance knows all the dirt. Yep. Maintenance does. Absolutely. What's funny in the dairy industry is if you want to find out what's going on at other plants, you talk to the truck drivers who drive around the milk trucks, because they deliver to multiple plants, and truck drivers, blah, 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 right? Truck drivers love to talk, and you can find out all kinds of stuff of what's going on. So listen.
Awesome.
Listen to what's going on.
Yeah. So that takes us to the third deadly sin, which is not identifying your goal. And I see this a lot, and this ties back into what we were talking about earlier, which is focusing strictly on knowledge. You can close that out. That we're done with that one now. So really getting into like how do we identify the KPI, right? But how do we identify the business outcome that we're looking to affect as a result of training? So going back to the knee-jerk reaction, a lot of times is that, well, people just need information, right? They need to know or become aware of, that's one of the, it's not a deadly sin that I included on here, but that's a running joke within the learning design community is creating learning objectives that say something about learner will become aware of. And it's like, no. Awareness alone is not enough. So really looking at, okay, well, we have this particular issue. Well, what KPI is this affecting? Because ultimately, if we're going back to the mission and the vision of the company, we got to be able to, all training has to support that mission and vision. And it has to be able to support some type of business outcome. We don't just do training because it's a nice to have. It's because it has to drive a specific KPI or business outcome.
Linkage to the objectives, because if you're doing something that nobody cares about, why are you doing it? So it's important then to cross-check that and say, okay, are these the things that are important at my plant? Are these the things that are important for my company? And looking at these type of things. Two points come to mind on this is with KPIs. To your point, be careful what you measure. So for example, if you put a KPI in place that says we will have 0 environmental positive hits next year, guess what? That's what you're going to get. Because the quality manager, whoever's doing the sampling, is going to make sure that you don't find anything, which means they're going to sample in bad spots, or they're not going to look really hard, and you're going to get that result. And you're going to be fooled because you think you have a nice, clean plant, and you don't. And when FDA shows up and does a swabathon, you get a very big surprise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So going back and identifying what is the KPI that we're really looking to affect. So going back to the identifying pathogens, right? The main goal there is not so much around the pathogen. It's that we want to make sure that we pass audits, or we want to reduce recalls. These are business outcomes, because otherwise, what's the point of reducing pathogens? We don't just reduce pathogens just for the sake of it. It's because there's a specific business outcome that's attached to that thing. Just like when we're doing leadership development training, what is the actual KPI or business outcome that we are hoping for from soft skill training or developing communication skills and things like that? We always have to find a way to get past the, like I said, nice to have, and attaching it to a specific business outcome. And one of the easy ways to do this is that, in learning design, we always create learning objectives. And we say, okay, well, what is our overall objective? And one of the ways that we can get hyper specific with that is there's this what's called the ABC model of creating learning objectives. And so when writing out a learning objective, we want to be very specific about who our audience is. That's the A, audience. B is behavior. What behavior do we want them to engage in? And C is the condition, right? Under what condition do we want them to engage in that behavior? So to give you an example, audience, I want all frontline employees to wash their hands for 20 seconds. That's the behavior. And the condition is, and then we outline the condition. Every time they go to the restroom, anytime they change gloves, anytime they pick something up off the floor, whatever those specific conditions are for when they should be washing their hands. And so now we have a much more specific outline of what it is that we're trying to achieve.
Nice. I love it. Right. So I'll add an and to that, because I absolutely love that. I'm going to remember that for sure. Is in quality, you should be looking at what you're doing in your role overall. And this ties into training into kind of like three main buckets. And I always look at how quality managers doing their job in this capacity. You have operational activities in a plant. So you have things that the plant needs to run efficiently. So pounds per man hour, cost of materials, labor, utilities, all these things that the plant manager is tracking. And guess what? As a quality manager, you're part of the quality team that is managing this company overall. You're part of the team. You're the management team within that facility. You need to be part of that and understand these things. The other two are going to be much more tied to what you're doing in that role, is food safety and food quality. Right? So really, as you're looking at, and this is what I love about this ABC model that you're talking about, is, okay, I'm setting up objectives around food safety. Why? Right? I want to protect public health. I want to make sure that the people who eat our product it's safe and it's not going to make them sick or worse, right? That's your starting point. Okay, well, how do I do that? Well, everybody needs GMP training. Everybody needs to have, to earlier, clean hands and wearing hairnets, and our equipment is clean, which then cascades down. The other side of it is the quality side of things. It's like, okay, there's certain expectations for this cup of coffee on how it tastes and things like this. How do I develop systems within my processes to make sure that we're controlling the quality of things, and then build out my training programs for that?
Mm-hmm. It's funny you mentioned hairnets, and this is something that I pay more attention to now. And I was at a gas station not too long ago that had like a little taco shop in the gas station, and in a big name place. I think they've started chains within like 7-Elevens around the area. But I remember seeing the woman back there making the tacos, and she had the hairnet on, and she had like styled her hair so that she had these nice little curls coming out at the front. And I was like, oosh.
Well, and that's a really good example of knowledge. Right? It's like, okay, why are we wearing a hairnet? Right? It's keep the hair out, right? Keep the hair out of the product, which means it needs to be there to keep the hair out of the product.
Right, all of the hair.
And a lot of times in quality, right, people will go down this path of being very authoritarian. I'll write a extremely specific policy around hair, and I'll take pictures of how everything looks and everything else, and make sure that that's all enforced. Well, that it doesn't work, because it almost becomes a game in the plant. So
right.
They're like, okay, I'll figure out a loophole around what Bryan has written, and then he makes me rewrite more stuff. It's like, right? No, who cares? And I learned that lesson, and I wish I'd learned it earlier. These type of things almost need to be written almost abstractly, right? And it's a very fine line that you need to go through with these things, and it has to go back to that reference of the reason we wear hairnets is to keep hair out of the product. So make sure that you're wearing your hairnet in a way that does that. That generally means this, right? Which then gives you the leadway as the quality manager to make those decisions. So if I've got a guy working in the plant who's got hairy gorilla arms, right, all kinds of, I'm gonna make him wear arm sleeves or something like that if he's in close proximity to product, right? And he's not going to buck that, because I'm going to say, no, our standard is we keep hair out of the product because we want to protect our consumers and make sure they have a good experience. And guess what, Mr. Gorilla Arms, your hairy arms aren't gonna do that. It always comes back to, I'm sure you've heard this argument too, Austin, is people who are bald or have no hair on their head at all. They're like, what do I need to wear a hairnet for? If you write your things correctly, well, now maybe they don't, right? Mm-hmm. Heresy. Oh my goodness. The bald guy's got to not wear a hairnet, right?
And yeah, as we're going through this, throw any questions out there, because I know that there's typically a lot of questions around learning design, and so I want to be able to address any questions that y'all have, because my goal is always to provide as much information so you can do as much of this stuff as you can, without hiring me. But yeah, so we'll move on to the next one, which is deadly sin number 4. Not making training skill or behavior based.
Ooh.
So this goes back to a little bit of what we were talking about earlier, which is learner will become aware of, or learner will understand, or this type of verbiage, and getting more specific into the skill or the behavior that we want to see. So a lot of times, what I always say is, don't stop at knowledge checks, right? So many, so many training programs go through the program, they do a quiz at the end. As long as you pass the quiz, then that is considered success. And that's not true, right? Just because I passed a quiz does not mean that I've developed a new skill or behavior. So just like the comment earlier about driving a stick, I can go through and read the manual and answer all the questions about it, but then you throw me out there and expect me to automatically be able to drive a stick. That's just not going to happen. I need practice.
Well, to stick on Abby's point here, when you're a young buck starting out and you get your driver's license for the first time and these type of things, and you're really proud of it, the process you go through is you do the written tests and things like this, and they evaluate your eyes in the machine, these type of things. And for the first go round, what do? They take you out on the road, right? You go out with a instructor who sits there and evaluates your ability to drive, right? So it's okay, fine. You've shown that you could pass the test. You really know how to drive.
Right. So that kind of drives home the point that just because I have new information does not mean that I will change my behavior, nor does it mean that I have the skill to change my behavior.
Right.
Knowledge is just the cost of entry, right? That is the cost of entry to driving a KPI, right? Yeah. Knowledge is never enough.
Right. And if I'm the quality manager and I have a KPI to train everybody this year in GMPs, and I dust off the same old GMP PowerPoint that I use every year, and I force everybody to go through GMP training, and I get mad when people are on vacation and make them take a test, and I think I'm done, right? No, because part of it too, right, is if you've been doing this for long enough, everybody already knows the answers, right? And they're all sitting there going, B, C, A, B, A, they're all top, what are you really achieving, right? It doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, we've got to go beyond that. And, and what's great is that, I think people get a little nervous around the concept of like talking about behaviors, but because it seems nebulous or overly psychological in nature, but behaviors are simple. I mean, is it observable and is it measurable? And that's how we know if the behavior is happening. We always go back to, is it observable? Is it measurable? If so, then that's the behavior that we're looking for.
Love it. And that's here's pro tip, guys. Write this one down. This is a lesson that I learned. Is that training in plants breaks down into two main groups. There is training that everybody needs to take, like we were talking about, like GMPs or lockout, tagout, or things like this, which are in a lot of ways more formalized, and you have those tests, and you still need to manage behavior. The other more important training is exactly what you're talking about here, which gets overlooked, Austin, which is the behavior piece. In that, if I'm a new operator and I come into the plant and I go through the GMP training and the onboarding and all these type of things, the real training takes place on the floor. So if you're my supervisor and you're teaching me how to run, let's say, a filler in a plant, that's where it happens, right? So, okay, here's how you run the filler. Here's how the panel works. Here's where the hand wash station is. Here's how you load the magazines. Here's how you check the heater head. Here's how you check the weight, all these type of things. And these all need to be documented by the supervisor, the person performing the training, to look at behavior. And then they are the persons who are evaluating that. So let's say, for example, you're my trainer and I'm the new operator. At some point, your boss is going to come to you, Austin, and say, how's Bryan working out? And you're going to give an evaluation of my training and my ability to learn on the job, right? Super important. And it always breaks down into three things. Bryan's doing a fantastic job, right? He's picking stuff up quickly. He's got a great attitude. I haven't had to correct any of his work. I think in about another week, we can let him go on his own. He'll be okay. Second one is Bryan. He's okay. I'm having to repeat myself on things. I've had to correct some of his errors. I think he'll be okay as, an average worker in the plant. As long as he has good supervision, he'll be fine. That third bucket is Bryan's horrible. Bryan showed up drunk yesterday. He tried to pick a fight with this guy in the break room. I caught him out back smoking. Cut bait. This guy's no good. We got to find somebody better. And that always happens.
Yeah. And one of the excuse me, one of the things that we do with a lot of our food safety culture programs, especially with leadership, is most of the time we don't include knowledge checks because because what I'm actually looking for is what Duncan is talking about here, right? If knowledge is persuasive enough to influence beliefs and values, then appropriate behaviors naturally follow. But I am measuring behaviors, right? And this is a tricky area within food safety culture, right? Because within the definition of food safety culture under GFSI, it talks about the values, beliefs, and norms of an organization around food safety. And so values and beliefs are next to impossible to measure, right? I could do it as coming in as an, anthropologist, and doing, it would take a massive effort to really measure the values and beliefs, but I can measure the norms or the behaviors, right? That Duncan is talking about. Yeah. So that is a reflection of the values and beliefs. It's like a tertiary evaluation model that we can use to figure out what the values and beliefs are. Yeah. But a lot of times we skip over knowledge checks because my job is not to get people to pass a knowledge test. My job is to shift behavior. And so that's the true measurement of success.
Yeah. And to kind of bring that up to the 30,000 foot on that side is, do you walk the talk? All right, okay, fine. We hear what you're saying. Are you actually doing it? And really, that's what every audit is about when an auditor comes into the plant. It's like, okay, fine. I read your procedures. I'm going to see if you're actually doing what you say. And that's behavior. So time here. Yeah. So what's
I know, right? Yeah. So deadly sin number 5, and this is a fun one. The belief that learners are rational.
Really? No, they are not.
I think coming to the understanding that none of us are rational, that we make decisions based on emotion, and then we justify them with rationality.
Oh, say that again, please. That's so important. And the people in the audience are going, no, that's not true. It is. Please repeat that.
Yeah, that we make decisions based on emotion, and then we justify those decisions with rational decision or rational thought process.
Yeah.
And there is so much research on this that is really fascinating. So one of my favorite books is by an author named Daniel Kahneman, and he won a Nobel Peace Prize for his research. And the book is called Thinking Fast and Slow. And what he really talks about is the idea of what he calls system 1 and system 2 thinking. So system 1 thinking is like before it's the reptilian brain, if you will. It's our gut instinct. It's what happens intuitively, right? The amygdala, is like that part of the brain that like gives us our reaction, right? If I step out into the street and the car starts to come by, I don't think about if I'm going to move. I just move, right? Because that's part of my evolutionary state. The system 2 is the more rational, prefrontal cortex. That's where we make our executive decisions. But usually system 1, the lizard brain, makes the decision first, and then we rationalize it with our more evolved brain. And so that's a really important thing to know when we're designing training, is that simply providing facts and data and graphs and information is not enough. We have to be able to speak to the emotion of people, right? Because that's ultimately how we make our decisions.
Yep. Here's a good example for me is that I may really like that brand new Audi RS5 Performance Sportback in the Prestige package with all the goodies and everything else that costs just an incredible amount of money, right? I will use my feelings, right? Because I don't need that car, right? A $5,000 used Kia is going to get me back and forth to work just as fine. I'm not going to get speeding tickets. I'm not going to have high insurance and things like that, but I want the RS5. And I will figure out a way to use my logical brain to justify it. Well, the prestige of this car, people are going to see this in the parking lot, and maybe my boss will see it and give me a raise and a bonus because obviously I'm such an awesome person because I drive this car. No, that's total rationalization, right? You don't need that. And you're fooling yourself. Everybody, right? And technical people, especially, Austin, hate to hear that. We think that we're Mr. Spock, right? We're out, we're only making this. No, we're not, right?
Mm-hmm. And so typically in knowing that learners are not rational and that simply using stats and graphs and information is not enough, we have to learn how to speak to the emotion of people, because that's ultimately what we're trying to speak to, especially around food safety. Yeah. And so, within my own practice, right, I create not just training curriculum, but I create these training films, and films that to me feel more like what you would watch on Netflix as opposed to a traditional training film, because we want to create these stories that tap into emotion, right? So if I want to affect behavior, I have to be able to speak to emotion. And right. The best way for me to speak to emotion is to utilize a story.
Right.
And so the storytelling is what really starts to drive that emotion, so that then I can kind of use that as a springboard to the information that's necessary for people to know.
And I'll reemphasize that as well, because that we have a huge advantage in food safety, because our food safety work and the things that we're doing to protect the public have a direct tie to emotion. Everyone loves their family. Everyone loves their children and grandchildren. And if you can speak to that in your training and show people that you're protecting children, you're protecting little babies, you are protecting your family, you're protecting your neighbors. That's why we do this, right? Mm-hmm. That is much more powerful than saying last year in the United States, we had X, Y, Z number of food recalls and blah, blah, blah. Who cares, right? It all comes down to people, and you need to link to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And Duncan's saying a few things here, right? But, learn behavioral economics. That's like a fascinating field of study that I've been, working on for the past 10 years to really learn how people truly work, because that's how I learned how to create these programs that can shift behavior, by not making these assumptions that people are rational. And then he mentioned Rory Sutherland. Highly recommend Rory Sutherland as well. He's a joy to watch. Very educated dude, but very entertaining. And I can't remember what book he wrote, but there was one that I read by Rory that was really good. Duncan, if you've read it, maybe throw it in the chat there. I just remember it has a yellow cover.
Okay. Before we move on here, and we got to keep this thing moving here, so I was putting in the comments here, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel, what was his last name?
Kahneman, Kahne. M is in Mary, A-N is in Nancy.
Crap, I'm sorry. You have to repeat that. I missed up on my typing. K-O what?
Kahnemen.
Bam, there we go.
Kahneman. There we go. I'm pretty sure that's how it's spelled.
All right. So moving on. Number 6.
Cool. So yeah, number 6, not making the learning personal and accessible. Big deadly sin. So there's a few different elements that this ties into. So making it personal and applicable. So to give you an example, we designed a food safety culture program for a very large, global ingredients manufacturer. So they have plants on basically every continent. But before facilitating the course for each plant, we'll go through and we'll do a walkthrough of the plant. And once again, meet people, find out what specific issues are going on within the plant. And then that way, whenever we facilitate the course, we can actually speak to some of the specifics of that plant, right? The course is canned, right? We've already written the curriculum. We've already created the film, like all of that to speak to the overarching culture of the company. But find those talking points that can speak to people on a personal level, to their job description, to the issues that they're faced with. Find those ways to make it as applicable as you can.
Yeah.
And then, also when I talk about making it accessible, right, that we also deal with a lot of companies that have people who don't have email, right? They don't have access to a computer. And so how am I going to deliver this digital training that I've created to people who work in the field? So considering, what's the deployment strategy going to look like? Because a lot of times, there will be this big push to create an e-learning, but then we find out that, it's not going to be accessible to people. So looking at what technology is available, do we do this pen and paper? Do we do this with a facilitator? Do we do this online? Because we need to know how the audience is going to consume this. And then in considering the audience, we also need to consider their level of education, right? Yeah. So when we talk about making this accessible, I need to make sure that I am speaking in their language. So if you have frontline workers with the average education, 8th grade education, well, then I need to make sure that my training speaks at that level of vernacular, right? And so, because a lot of us are highly specialized in what we do, and we start to use terminology and phrases and acronyms. I've been on calls before, and I use KPI thinking that this is a commonly known term, and I'll have people ask me, what I don't know what that is. And I'm like, oh man, I didn't think about that. Business outcome. It's a business outcome.
Yep. It's like that old saying, if you assume, right, it makes an ass out of you and me. And so this goes back to another saying I would use with people writing procedures and processes as well, is, to your point, simple is hard, right? You need to be able to write something in simple, elegant ways that are easily understood. That is, trying to train and teach people on how to do things is not the point to show off your knowledge and vocabulary.
Yeah. And that is very true. And that is a skill set that I continue to work on a daily basis, which is how do I simplify my message as much as possible? I think it's the famous Mark Twain quote where, he sent this long letter to a friend, and he said, at the end, he says, "Sorry for the long letter. It would have been shorter if I had more time."
Exactly. Well, we're getting short on time here, so we're going to have to boogie here and moving on to number 7. What's the 7th deadly sin?
Sure. So 7th deadly sin of training is one and done training. So doing the training once, assuming that, they passed the knowledge test and therefore now everything is good as gold and we move forward with our lives. And just like we were talking about earlier with the clutch issue or the driving a standard, you go out there and you read all the information, and then you don't have the chance to practice repeatedly. You can't develop that skill. And you can even bring up that other graphic real quick. And so this is something called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. And this research goes way back, like 1890s, I think, that Ebbinghaus learned this. But basically, there's your forgetting curve, right? You go through training, you get the information, you got the 100%, right? You pass the test, but within a day, you've already lost, roughly 20% of that information. We just forget. It's just how it goes. So we have to reinforce that training again, and you see that it spikes back up to 100 because it's like, well, now you've gotten a reminder, and you see over time that curve gets longer and longer, the fall off curve, because now we start to retain more and more information. But we have to have those touch points along the way. So typically with any training that we're doing a one-time initiative and then calling it done is not going to get the results that we want to see. We have to continually reinforce this stuff.
And so here's a point. Right? If you're a quality manager in a plant and you're doing GMP training once a year, and you wonder why people aren't following GMPs, this is it. But what's really cool here is, and this is kind of the silver lining, is look how much you increase your retention just from the first to the second reminder, right? So you go from 3-day retention to 7-day retention at those same levels, right? How that moves that, right? So you got to put in the work.
Yeah. And this is, like you've probably seen me, promoting our new course, which is creating a speak up culture. Right. And to create a speak up culture, this is a behavior based training. And this is something that has to be reinforced consistently, almost daily with the team to let them know that, yes, we do value your input and there's not going to be punishment. But also to reinforce the training with the team lead, I'm helping them develop a new skill around how to create this speak up culture. So I can't just push them through a training and expect them to go out and be successful. So so it takes them, 30 days to go through this training, where it's like there's a little reminder each day or once a week within an email. So it keeps that fresh and top of mind, and it keeps them thinking about this stuff. So yeah, find ways you can take existing trainings that you're normally doing in one dump and then say, well, how can I segment this up over time so that it's not just in one sitting, but that we create it so that there's one module per week. And so now it becomes habit, and it's part of my process now.
Yeah. So really, so to that point, going on our GMP side of these things, right? You do the trainings, or you design a great program talking about things we're talking about, and then you're going out and working with people on the floor and reinforcing that behavior over time, which is why, right, it goes back to what I said at the beginning. Having a corrective action that's immediately fired back to me that said trained personnel, I know it's BS.
Right. And kind of in closing, if any of y'all want book recommendations, feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn, and I can make any kind of, I'm a pretty avid reader when it comes to things like behavioral economics, learning design, sociology, psychology. Let me know what you're struggling with, and I can point you in the right direction.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, Duncan, yeah, it literally solidifies, right? It becomes hardwired into your brain. That's our goal, is to make this hardwired. So we're almost out of time here. So let's bring it back up to the 30,000 foot level, Austin, and summarize this for everybody. What would you like everyone to leave with today?
Basically leave with, when designing training, spend a little time to just think about what could go wrong here. I like to do what I call a pre-mortem, and figure out, where could things fall apart? Where do I have gaps here? And then, if you have any questions about this type of stuff, reach out to me, and, I'm always more than happy to provide some guidance. But yeah, I think that's the main thing is don't have a knee-jerk reaction. Think about what exactly you want to accomplish and how you want to accomplish it.
Perfect. I love it. And what email should people reach you at, Austin, if they have questions?
Sure. Excuse me. My email is austin@sage.media. And that is it. There's no .com, just sage.media.
There we go, in the comments. And wow, we are out of time. So fantastic chat. This is, boy, if you listen to this, and better yet, if you go back and listen to it again in the Food Safety Chat database, you're going to pick up more nuggets out of this, right? So repetition applies to us as well, right? So you need to learn and model, and we're talking knowledge on this call. Now you need to take what we're teaching you and apply it, right? You need to develop that skill. And Austin is really good at helping with that. So with that, we'll close out our chat for this week. And Austin, thank you. God, I love having you on. You're always, it's just a fire hose of information. Thank you.
Sure thing, man. Thanks. It's fun.
Yeah. And to thank you to everybody who's taking the time out, right? An hour a week is a huge investment. And we really, really appreciate you taking the time to develop your skills and learn more. And thank you very much. And as a result of that, go home this weekend. I give you permission to relax, have a little fun, maybe watch some football, and then go back next week. And we'll see you here on Friday at the same time on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter, where we live stream every week at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern. And I'll bring another awesome guest like Austin on to have a chat. So thanks, everybody. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you, Austin, and have a great one, guys.
Awesome. See you
Thanks,
soon.
everyone. Yay.